First of all, I'll just give you very quick introduction on the Inside Action. Many of you know us already, so I won't be very long, and I'll leave you the website of our project so you can find more information there, or always come up to us and ask for any more questions. Today I'm here with quite a number of you, so nice to see such a large bunch of people. Thanks again for joining. Together with me, there's Isabelle Johansson, who is also a member of the Insight research team. Let me also welcome our guests, Ophelia and Nicole, that Isabelle will introduce to you. It's really an honor to have here two members of the Red Umbrella Sweden. We've been thinking about this webinar for quite some time. We wish that we could be lively, meeting you all in person, but hopefully that will be a possibility sometime soon. Very quickly on myself, my name is Michela Semprebon. I'm a sociologist by background, and I've been working for more than 20 years now on the inclusion of migrants at the local level, especially on policies. And in the last 2 years, I've been especially focusing on issues relating to trafficking and social protection programs relating to people that have been involved in trafficking, including also unaccompanied minors, as I'm a legal guardian myself. So I've been somehow involved in the double role of researcher and guardian. The Insight project, again, very quickly, is a project that was financed by the European Commission. We're now in a final year of consolidation to promote the results of our research and especially keep the discussions going. At UAB University, where I'm based, which is the leading member of the project, we're very much used to work in a way whereby academia is always having discussions and confrontation directly with third sector and all the actors that are actually working in the field, because we think that's the best way to contribute to producing knowledge. The project is again on trafficking, especially from Nigeria to Europe, Italy and Sweden in particular. And we've been looking at trafficking from a variety of angles, especially looking at forms of sexual exploitation, but also really trying to have a look at the different forms of exploitation, including labor exploitation. And to give you an example on begging, which is not very much explored, which means focusing on women and men. So an intersectional approach that really tries to look at the theme in the widest sense possible. Let me just add a last thing, which is not less important. We've been co-organizing this event together with GRIPS, which is a group of Italian and also European researchers that are engaged on sex work and related themes. And if any of you is from GRIPS, I can't see it right now, but I may be missing someone, and you want to come forward, I would be very happy to give you the word also to say more about the group. And also we have, I think I saw Ermin before, maybe Pia too, that are part of the Comitato per i diritti delle prostitute. They've also been collaborating to the organization of this event, and I'm really glad to have them here. They were also in the first seminar that we organized with this project. So again, it's really good to have you here and to get the discussion going. Very last thing, and then I'll give the floor to Isabelle. I've just posted the website of our project. Let me just add the link to a page of the website where you can download the reports that we've been writing. They'll be all published soon. 2 have been published yesterday. One is specifically on Sweden, which is the research work that Isabelle has been carrying out, and we've been writing about this in a specific report. So let me give the floor to Isabelle Johansson. I haven't introduced you yet, actually, but I'll let you do it better than I can, and then leave you the floor for the rest of the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Michela. Well, so my name is Isabelle Johansson. I was a researcher in the Insight project, focusing on the Swedish part. Prior to that, I've worked for the UNODC in Vienna with evaluating human trafficking policy on a global scale. I've also been involved in other research projects where I've looked at the relationship between the sex trade and the issue of human trafficking. Prior to that, I was working with harm reduction in Italy, where we worked to ensure that migrant sex workers were accessing their rights to healthcare and so on. So a bit of mixed experience in that regard, research, but also practical work. And I'm very happy to be here today with Ophelia and Nicole from Red Umbrella Sweden, the Swedish sex workers' rights organization that we have here. And so I'm going to talk today to Ophelia and Nicole about how their organization, Red Umbrella Sweden, which I will refer to as RUS, probably as we go on. I will talk about how they work to support their peers. And we will address the challenges that they face working in Sweden with improving the lives of sex workers here. We will also talk about how the challenges that they face relate to the Swedish anti-trafficking system and how the Swedish focus on the sex trade kind of intersects with some of the challenges they face in their work. And I first want to start off briefly by saying that internationally, sex workers' rights organizations have been acknowledged as a very important contributor in tackling issues such as human trafficking and exploitation within the sex trade in their role as a peer-to-peer community. And we know not only from the sex trade context that peer-to-peer organizations are fundamental in improving the rights and lives of individuals and groups, where trust in government agencies like the police, for instance, is pretty low. And we can see this among undocumented migrants, be they sex workers or not. So this peer-to-peer community is something that we've now acknowledged as an important contributor. At the same time, peer-to-peer communities often find themselves working in isolation without the support of government agencies and other actors working with the issue of trafficking. So before I start talking to Ophelia and Nicole, I'll present just some of the main research findings from the insight research that I did in Sweden as it relates to the topic we're addressing today. There, for those who are interested, of course, you can go ahead and read the report, and I welcome you to do so. But I won't be able to cover everything because the focus is on talking about RUS and their work. But there are some important findings from the research I conducted that I think are worth addressing to kind of give you a frame of the issue we're going to go into. Before I start with the brief presentation about my findings, I just want to make a quick note about terminology, as we've received some emails about terms that were used in the description of this event, and that regards the term sex workers. And I want to say that it's been my decision to use this term in describing the event, but I also use it within the realms of the report that I wrote. I decided to use this term, although it can be a bit of a sore spot in certain contexts, especially in the Swedish context. Sex workers as a term is acknowledged by the academic community looking at sex trade related issues as a non-judgmental alternative to individuals in prostitution, prostitutes, and prostituted women, for instance. And the term sex worker can comprise individuals who are experiencing situations of exploitation and other issues when they sell sexual services. And sex workers can, of course, also be identified as victims of trafficking, but they're not necessarily victims of trafficking or experiencing exploitation. Sex workers can also refer to individuals who sell sex voluntarily and do so without experiencing any issues. But since going back to the acknowledgement of sex workers' organizations in the work against issues such as exploitation and human trafficking, I think it's important that we just we emphasize that this term is now gaining grounds as kind of the legitimate alternative when talking about individuals who sell sex. So if anyone has any questions, I would reserve about terminology, I would reserve those for the very end, but I just wanted to make this comment. So that's at least my take. And if Ophelia and Nicole want to develop anything in regards to that during their answers, they can of course do so. But that's kind of where I'm coming from in my research. So now I'm going to just briefly share my screen with you, and we'll talk about some of the main findings from Sweden. Yeah, so I want to say that based on our research in Sweden, we have found that the Swedish anti-trafficking system has developed quite significantly over the past 5 or 6 years, let's say. The Swedish national referral mechanism from 2016 is one of the most notable recent developments that I have found. The national referral mechanism sets out the roles and responsibilities of actors who are acknowledged as an important part of the anti-trafficking system, and it describes what their role and responsibility is in regards to individuals identified as victims of trafficking. And the national referral mechanism is divided into 6 steps, where identification leads to support and protection measures that are available to identified individuals in Sweden, and then criminal proceedings. And the last step of the national referral mechanism in Sweden is that the individual identified as a victim of trafficking is to be returned to their country of origin or a place where they have the right to reside. And given Sweden's geographical location, we find that many individuals who are identified as victims of trafficking in Sweden have actually been in other European countries before their arrival to Sweden. And so they might be returned to countries such as Italy or Spain, other European countries where they have previously registered in some form. And what we can say about the national referral mechanism is that it has greatly improved coordination and collaboration between key actors, government agencies, and organizations in the Swedish context, including NGOs. However, some of the weaknesses that we found is that the focus in Sweden largely remains on criminal proceedings and punitive measures against offenders in the anti-trafficking system. So punishing individuals who are identified as offenders. There's unfortunately also a lack of long-term support measures available to identified victims of trafficking in Sweden, since the national referral mechanism is geared towards the return of them to a country of origin or residency rights. There is no way for victims of trafficking to stay in Sweden long-term. They can only stay here temporarily to partake in criminal proceedings as witnesses. So that's one weakness that we've identified. And although we see a positive development in terms of collaboration between important anti-trafficking stakeholders in the Swedish context, we see that peer-to-peer organizations are very much lacking as acknowledged contributors in the system. And there is no established collaboration between sex workers organizations and other key anti-trafficking stakeholders in the Swedish context, which is a weakness that we've identified through our research. And the reason why it has been hard for Swedish sex workers organizations to be acknowledged as contributors in the anti-trafficking system, largely has to do with the fact that the system intersects very strongly with the Swedish prostitution policy, which aims to abolish the trade in sexual services. So what we see in Sweden is that we have a repressive prostitution policy in place. And there are several measures where we can see this link. For instance, our action plans are geared towards abolishing not only human trafficking, but also the trade in sexual services as a whole. So all our action plans have this link very presently. We can also see the link between working against human trafficking and the sex trade as a whole in the different coordination mandates that we have. This is explicitly set out both in our national and our regional coordination mandates. And the persistence on repressing or abolishing the sex trade in Sweden, we find may impact quite negatively on the anti-trafficking system's ability to address the needs of individuals who are experiencing exploitation in the sex trade. Research has shown, not only ours, that punitive laws prevent people in the sex trade from reaching out to government agencies and also NGOs to seek assistance, to report abuse and exploitation and other crimes committed against them. So we can see that this works as a kind of barrier in establishing a collaboration between sex workers organizations who work to improve the lives of sex workers, regardless of whether or not they are experiencing exploitation. It also, of course, further hinders any development of workplace oversight and protection in sex trade related businesses, as those businesses are being penalized. So that's kind of briefly what we find regarding the connection between sex workers organization and the Swedish anti-trafficking system. More can be said about that, but I'm not going to take all the time to summarize the findings. We will also address some of them in the questions that I have for Ophelia and Nicole. But if anyone has any question regarding that summary, please feel free to ask me about that. Otherwise, I will carry on.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, of course.
What I wanted to ask is, I'm from Belgium. I work for the Independent National Rapporteur for THB in Belgium, and we can act as civil party in judicial cases. So we can analyze, and we have access to the full cases. Mm-hmm. And we have also a lot of Nigerian cases, and we see also connections with Italy, but also with Sweden. Mm-hmm. And what we also hear when in the reunions, that is because I hear from you that there is a focus on criminal proceedings and punitive measures against offenders, but mm-hmm. what I hear in reality, they try to start some cases against criminal networks, but their focus is mostly only against clients. Mm-hmm. And there are, what I heard is that there are practically no convictions of THB against the real exploiters in Sweden.
That's correct. We see quite low numbers of human trafficking convictions in the Swedish context in comparison to other European countries. What we do see are convictions that regard procuring, which is any sort of third-party facilitation of the trade in sexual services. So what in colloquial terms would be called pimping. But it's not only necessarily the case that so-called pimps get penalized by this procurement ban that we have. We also have instances where partners, so love partners of sex workers have been penalized. But yeah, it's true. We do not have a lot of human trafficking convictions, but we do have a lot of procuring, or we have quite a significant amount of procuring convictions, and we have a law against paying for sexual services, and there we see a steady rise in convictions over time. So that's a correct observation. There is an important difference, though, to acknowledge in terms of the nature of the legal measures at hand in Sweden. So the human trafficking law, here we talk about a crime against the person. So there is a crime victim to speak of. That crime victim could be a person in a situation where they're forced to beg or work under unreasonable conditions in construction, or it could be an individual selling sexual services. But that person would constitute a crime victim and would also be entitled to the rights that are attached to that status. When it comes to procuring and the sex purchase ban, we do not necessarily have any crime victims. So those are not by nature crimes against a person, but they're crimes against public order and the state. So that's an important difference that we see. I don't know if that's clear. If you understand what I mean with that different, but we have different types of crimes, and they are all being reported. For instance, our national rapporteur on human trafficking report them in the context of our situation reports, yearly situation reports on human trafficking. So they're part of that. I don't know if that was an answer to your question.
I think you're muted.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it was a question, but I want also to say, can you conclude then that the Swedish system is also not efficient in the fight against human trafficking, against criminal networks, like the Nigerian networks? But I also wanted to say, when you focus on clients, you can only maybe only find one person who is linked with the client, but you lose the sight against the complete criminal network, and you need that with wiretapping and other investigation tools to liquidate the complete criminal networks. And that's what I wanted to say, that that is what I find, that the Swedish anti-trafficking system is not productive in the fight against human trafficking and against the criminal networks.
Yes, of course, there is definitely a criticism to be put forward in that regard. The focus on clients or individuals who purchase sex is, of course, quite a narrow focus when we're talking about complex criminal networks. So I would say that's a correct observation. And I think in my questions here to Ophelia and Nicole, we will a bit touch upon the further issues with focusing in on this way when working against exploitation in the sex trade. But I would agree with that observation.
Isabelle, I can see that there's another question in the chat. I don't know if you want to pick it up now. I can read it out, or maybe later.
Oh, from Marian?
Yes.
Okay, so Marianne is asking how anti-immigration and anti-prostitution law, in particular the suspicion of sex work as reasons for deportation, impact on identification of victims. Basically, this means you deport possible victims before they can even ask for help or report to the police. Yeah, so Marianne, you're correct in that we have one part of the Swedish anti-trafficking system is the Aliens Act, which is the law that relates to immigration, the Swedish immigration law. And one section of the Aliens Act has been used to deport individuals or migrants who've sold sexual services in Sweden, because this has been deemed as a dishonest mean of financial support. So the Aliens Act sets out that migrants who are present on Swedish territory should support themselves by honest means. And the selling of sexual services has been deemed a dishonest mean. And so there have been cases where migrants who have been in the sex trade have been deported. I know of at least one documented instance where a deported migrant woman was later called back to Sweden to participate in the criminal proceedings against a handful of individuals who were convicted of human trafficking and procuring. So in that instance, the person was deported without being identified as a victim of trafficking, and then was called back to Sweden to partake as a witness against these individuals, and which resulted then in one of our few human trafficking convictions. And coming back to the introduction, I guess here this is one instance, an empirical case where the role of sex workers organizations like Red Umbrella Sweden becomes quite apparent, at least from my own perspective, where we see a lack of acknowledgement of potential vulnerability from government agencies like the police, who instead of ensuring support and protection to an individual, which was later identified then as a trafficking victim, focused on deporting that individual because they were earning their living dishonestly, to quote the document. So yeah, that's
I guess if I may say that, I guess this means that any migrant sex worker who is a victim of exploitation, of trafficking, who goes to the police risks being deported. So I guess very few victims would take that risk.
There is definitely the risk of deportation. And of course, it depends on, or it's not of course, unfortunately, I guess it depends on which police officer you meet. And if that police officer has been trained in the issue of human trafficking or not. But even the knowledge of the fact that one person has been deported for this reason would, I guess, act as a deterrent if I were a migrant sex worker in Sweden.
Yeah, never go to the police.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the policy, the repressive prostitution policy that we have in place in Sweden has a large impact on the relationship that you are able to construct between individuals in the sex trade, whether organized or not, and government agencies like the police, who are important in terms of ensuring the rights of individuals. Yep, for sure. But here I would want to invite Ophelia and Nicole to take part of the conversation and start by asking my questions to you. I don't know if you have a spontaneous comment to what's been said so far. Before,
I mean, just to Maria's question, there's been many such cases of people who just get stopped at the border. So we actually don't know. Yeah. But yeah, let's start our conversation. I'm excited.
Yeah. So you're both members of Red Umbrella Sweden, RUS, which is a promising organization as far as creating future collaborations between anti-trafficking stakeholders and sex worker organizations is concerned. So could you tell us about Red Umbrella Sweden and what you do to support sex workers?
Sure. The main purposes of Red Umbrella Sweden is to provide peer support to sex workers, but also to inform others about the situation for sex workers in Sweden and how the legislation affects us. But yeah, in the first instance, all of us members, we are all volunteers. We support each other in all the different ways that we can. And for us, it's super important that the support that we give is centered on the actual needs of sex workers rather than some sort of ideology or some goal of ending prostitution or something like that. And we know that this kind of peer support is pretty vital to marginalized communities because like only peers can offer this kind of non-judgmental support that kind of focuses on supporting each other and celebrating like strengths instead of, trying to repress something. And we all kind of turn to the organization both for support and also to give support. So for example, Nicole is super active in trying to get more migrants involved. And Nicole has also asked for support from the organization. And the same with me. I'm doing this talk, for example, but I might log in to ask for mental health support when I have problems with my family, for example. So we help with all sorts of things. And this format of being volunteers and a peer-to-peer organization also have some problems, of course, because we're not funded in any way and we've taken on a pretty huge job. And the needs of our members, it's like quite diverse. So it includes everything from help with immigration to mental health to discrimination on housing markets to like family and relationship problems, paying tax. The Swedish sex workers are supposed to pay tax, how to get a bank account, problems with clients, questions about sexual health, LGBT issues, how to avoid the police, how to survive during COVID. It's pretty big. And at least in my eyes, a lot of these areas should be provided by the state or by experts like psychologists or tax advisors. So it's been a pretty big responsibility for us. And, we're taking time off from our work, sex work, to work with this like unpaid.
Many shoes to fill.
Yeah, for sure. We're doing as well as we can. And then, the other purpose is to kind of communicate to the world about the situation for us sex workers in Sweden, because we had this law, the sex purchase law, and the other laws that work to kind of stop prostitution in Sweden for 22 years. And there's really quite little information about the effect that has on us who sell sex. So we're trying to document what's happening to our members and other sex workers and kind of sharing this. And we also have contact with other sex workers and organizations in the world, especially now a few countries have the same law as us in Sweden or similar laws. So we try to work together.
Sorry, you were saying.
I think I answered your question. I don't know. People might have questions after.
For sure. A broad spectrum of peer support is what you do. It's also what you need to do given the variety of experiences of your members.
Yeah, and the lack of support from other places, I would say.
Mm-hmm. How many active members, if I may ask, do you have about?
I have almost 100, but of course people come and go. But I mean, I've been a sex worker in many countries. And I would say our community is one of the most active. It's like 24/7 you can get support or talk to someone. So it's pretty cool. We didn't. It wasn't that long ago that we started, so we're very proud of it.
Yeah, as you should be. Do you want to add anything, Nicole, to the work about the work of Red Umbrella Sweden?
Yeah, I would say we provide also, or at least we try to make connections with people who can go and get free HIV testing in Sweden in different locations. And at least that's what I think of for now. I think we have a question as well in the chat.
Oh yes, so someone's asking here, Claudia Di Matteo, where we're based in Sweden. So we're based in all of Sweden. We have members really that live in the smallest villages and big cities. And yeah, it's kind of hard to meet up, but we have kind of local meetups in some places.
Sweden, I don't know, maybe everyone isn't aware, but Sweden is quite a long country. The population is it's mainly centered in the center towards the south, but Sweden is quite a big country.
I mean, we have like the Rus North, but the people who live in Rus North, it might be like 7 or 8 hours for them to travel to each other. So it's not super convenient for meeting.
Yeah, far distances up there. Yeah,
for sure.
So oh, sorry, there's another. Are there women's or other organizations in Sweden that support sex workers and sex workers organization?
I would say that there's some that claim to support, as they call it, women in prostitution, I guess. But as soon as you mention the term sex work, they are not interested in helping, or you'd have to fill a very specific role as a victim.
I can just add that in the 6 years that I have been in Sweden, the only encounter I have had that has been positive has been Red Umbrella Sweden.
With Red Umbrella?
Yeah. I have had other encounters with social services and other police, and so nothing has been a good experience so far. Only Red Umbrella has been.
I'm sorry to hear that. So you came to Sweden 6 years ago, Nicole?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's like incredibly positive that like Nicole found us, and then now you're one of the most active people who are also supporting others. So it's really cool like that. I think that we have quite a few questions here, and I would appreciate if we could keep them to the end, because I think a lot of them will be answered during our conversation.
Yeah,
we don't get
for sure.
Stopped.
Actually, a question that's coming up right now in the chat is quite intersects with my following question for you. So a common misconception about the Swedish model of prostitution policy is that it criminalizes the purchase, but not the sale of sexual services. So clients are criminalized, but not sex workers. That is kind of the rhetoric that surrounds the Swedish policy. In practice, however, we see that the policy as a whole actually penalizes sex workers, as it's comprised by a range of measures. For instance, the ban on paying for casual sex, the procurement ban, which makes any facilitation of the trade in sexual services a crime, be it helping a person with driving a sex worker to a venue where sex is being sold, to actually profiting from the gains of a sex worker. So a broad ban. Then we also have the section in the Aliens Act that I addressed before that makes it possible to deport migrants who sell sex for earning a living by dishonest means. Could you give some more examples of how Swedish policy as a whole affects you as sex workers?
Yeah, well, a lot of the stuff that you mentioned do happen. Sweden does claim that the model puts their focus to the buyers and protection of people who sell sex, but instead sex workers remain the main target of policing and become criminalized through the enforcement of third-party laws like immigration laws and fiscal policies, leading to deportations, as you mentioned earlier, forced evictions, police harassment on sex workers, and more of those stuff are actually happening. The policing of sex work focuses on migrant sex workers and is racialized, targeting especially those of color, but not only. It can be everyone. Nobody in the industry can fully escape the punishment of sex work. They're targets of evictions, police constantly booking, visiting our sex workers' apartments and so on, outing sex workers to hotels, apartments, and booking companies, everything as possible as they can, basically, to try to stop the purchase. What is even more disturbing is that people around us can be victimized of the so-called couplery in Swedish, or pimping on English.
The procurement ban.
Like just simply living with someone who knows you're a sex worker. Could be anyone, such as parent, friend, any type of relative. If you have any type of relationship and they know you're living with or in the same flat or anything, the eyes of the law is you're not allowed to that.
Should also say that the ban on procurement in Sweden makes it so that anyone who rents an apartment to an individual who they suspect is selling sex in that apartment should alert the authorities as to not be charged with procurement themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
We actually had we have many members that this happened to, but this just happened to last week, where the police came to her and they said, if you don't stop selling sex now, your landlord will evict you. And someone told us this is not illegal and you should fight it. And she said, what options do I have? I can't fight this. I can't report the police, because doing so would mean that I'm outed with my name and my profession as a sex worker in my small town where my parents live. Like, it's not possible. And I can't move because I'm taking care of my old parents. Like, we're put in a situation where nothing they do against us we can fight. You know, it's also happened to you, Nicole. There is nothing you can do. Very
experienced
crazy.
a lot through the years. Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately.
Have you experienced false bookings from the police?
Yeah, many times.
Acting to be clients in order to come and. So that's should clarify that to the audience. So in Sweden, the police targets sex worker ads. So they'll find ads where a person is offering sexual services, and they will make a false booking pretending to be a client, so that they can investigate the situation further. And this is done under the label of anti-trafficking raids or anti-trafficking measures. However, as far as I'm aware, and I have found no documented case where such a raid has actually resulted in a trafficking conviction. So I think this procedure is
highly disturbing how much this is happening, and especially this past year with COVID, it's happening every week. And these police officers, it seems like they're allowed to do pretty much whatever they want, and they are hailed as heroes. People don't question or talk about at all how this affects us who sell sex. And now we have to spend so much time trying to keep safe from the police, when we should be, keeping ourselves safe from people who actually want to harm us. And the trauma of having police running into your apartment and searching it, like one person thought that 6 people were running into her apartment with guns. Like, people are
confiscating
for years. They've taken money, they take your cell phone, like everything you have to continue your work and stay, part of society is taken from you. Your apartment, your computer, like, how is this supposed to help anyone? And I think we also forget, like, for me as a sex worker, a huge thing is like listening to my gut, listening to my instincts, being able to use safety measures to choose what clients I'm going to see, and I do this and I trust someone to come into my home that's going to be very close to me in an intimate situation, and that turns out to be a cop. Like, it's a betrayal. It makes us feel crazy, and it does not make sex workers safe. And it's the relationship with the police is built on a betrayal and a lie. It doesn't make us trust the cops, like none of this, and it's hugely harmful.
Could you briefly tell the audience how the sex trade is organized in Sweden, for those everyone might not be aware? Like, how are sexual services being sold? Like, what do the working conditions look like for you?
Well, I mean, there's so many different kinds of sex work, and people do it in different ways. And there are some legal places to do sex work, like strip clubs. You can do some kinds of BDSM work, or porn is also legal. But for full service sex workers, there's no workplace like a brothel or something like that. So we find clients, some people work in a massage parlor, which is illegal. Then we find clients through on the street or in a bar. But I think most common is that you put an ad on the internet. Clients answer the ad, and then you meet them, like either in their home, your home, a hotel, in a car, something like that. So that's the main way that we find clients. And then we try to, of course, screen them in some way to make sure that they're nice people, that they will pay, that they are looking for the services that we actually offer. And a big problem in Sweden is that people don't want to give this information, like, that can identify them, because of course then it can be used against them, because it's illegal to see a sex worker. So they can act in ways that seem very sketchy. Like, to me, who works in other countries, when I come to Sweden, I'm like, oh, these guys all seem so weird and avoidant and scary, but it's just like they're so nervous. So we don't have a lot of personal information about them. Yeah, someone just asked, pornography is not illegal in Sweden. You can produce pornography. And of course, like, there's so many laws that work against us, sex workers. So for example, these border controls, like, they might target someone who's from a certain country, go through their bag, and if there are condoms inside, they will be stopped. Or there are organizations that train hotel staff to recognize sex workers and then call the police. There's like a lot of information campaigns, like to people who own Airbnbs, that they shouldn't rent out to us, this kind of thing. So all this together, and with the racism involved, it's like, it can be pretty hard to like, everything is sort of like trying to make it harder for independent sex workers to work. And so some people turn to someone who can help them to put up ads or to find them clients, especially if they don't speak Swedish or English. And of course, that's a situation that is highly criminalized and can lead to a lot of exploitation. Like, we know, for example, there's some people who rent out apartments to sex workers, like, people they know are sex workers, and do it to like such inflated prices, like thousands and thousands, like several times more what it would normally cost, because they're also taking a risk, is the reasoning. Or they ask for sexual favors in return. Or there's even people who rent out to sex workers, migrant sex workers mainly, then they call the police. And because you've broken their rules by selling sex, you don't get the money back. So there's a number of ways that this kind of, us having to be underground, can actually lead to quite exploitative situations.
Mm-hmm. So what role does Red Umbrella Sweden play in all this? Do you have any specific examples of how you support migrant sex workers in this regard? Like, can you help people find housing, or,
I mean, our members help each other with whatever members are asking for, but of course it puts us in a situation that's also risky, because I mean, when we've gone out on the street to areas where street-based sex workers work and ask, you know, what are your needs? Would you like to join an organization? Like, is there anything we can do to support you? You know, they're like, can you put an ad out for me? Can you help me write an ad? Can you take a photo of me and put it on the internet? Like, all those things are, of course, that's pimping in Sweden. And as an organization, that's really risky for us. But yeah, members help each other in any way they can. And especially housing is housing is a problem even for Swedes who don't sell sex. And for migrant sex workers, it's a real hassle.
Yeah, Sweden is known for a constant housing shortage in general terms. So of course this trickles down to all different layers of society.
But I think, I mean, a lot of the things is like, it's a problem because we can't turn to the regular places where we're supposed to turn. So finding a therapist that you can talk to and mention that you sell sex without that being the biggest thing, the only thing that you have to focus on, that's a problem. Like going to someone to help you with your taxes, that's a problem. Finding a bank account, it's not possible. Like, it's just all these things that stop us from being full members of society. Is like, there's stops everywhere. So we're like trying to do our best to just support each other.
So the two of you both have experiences being migrants and selling sex in different countries. Nicole, you said you came to Sweden 6 years ago. Ophelia, you've been around different countries selling sex. Which are the main challenges you would say that migrants who sell sex in Sweden are facing, besides those that you touched upon now, with taxes, bank accounts, housing? I know we've spoken about racialized procedures coming from the police. Yeah. Are there other examples that you can add to the list?
I mean, I would say that the main challenges are the closed and the oppressed thinking of the departments and how they handle everything. Everything has focused on basically just on narratives of sexual violence being portrayed by bad men who buy sex. In media, everyone is portraying that. That need to be basically punished through state criminal justice system, and sex workers, all of us, either if they're independent or not, are just portrayed as victims. That's all. Until that thinking changes, I personally think nothing will.
I think.
Could you name? Sorry.
Just like as an example, like me and Nicole were in Gothenburg, and I'm gonna sell sex there in a hotel, and Nicole was like, I think it's better I don't walk with you inside, because when they see me and they see that I'm a migrant, they will think that maybe you're a sex worker too. It's probably better for you that I stay outside. And what is that? Like some sort of heart hate? Like, it made me feel really crazy. Like, the thing is, like, I am in a way a migrant sex worker, of course. Like I travel around and work in different places, but you know, I've done a lot of stuff that maybe would be considered trafficking. Like, for example, other people have paid for my flights, or I've owed someone money when I started working at their brothel, or I have to give them like a high percent of my earnings, like 40-50%. But like, I face nothing of the crap and the policing and mistreatment that many of my colleagues, like Nicole, like is facing in Sweden. And like, why is that? Like, why is my life as a sex worker relatively smooth? And I can tell you why. It's like, it's because I'm Swedish. Like, I'm Swedish, I'm white, I'm cis, I have an EU passport, I speak English. It's like these laws and attitudes that targeted to stopping women from poorer countries from traveling to work. Like it's a clear divide how you see sex workers in Sweden, especially. Like there's two groups. People like me, okay, maybe sometimes women from Sweden are seen as mentally ill or they're self-harming or something, but we're still allowed to have some sort of independent thinking and choice. Whereas if you're from a country like Romania or somewhere in South America, then it's like automatically you're a victim of trafficking. That's the idea. Like in the media, we see it all the time. Like, yeah, we're not sure what happened here, but the woman was from one of Europe's poorest countries. And then that's like, then of course she was a victim. Or like, how would a woman from Bulgaria travel all by herself to Karlstad? Like, I don't know, maybe she bought an airplane ticket. Like, like it's really, really ridiculous, and it's really fucked. And even like within the industry, like even if you don't look at housing or policing, it's like in the industry, this racism turns up all the time. So because the clients have been told that all migrants are victims of trafficking, of course, most people don't want to buy sex from someone who is a victim. And so they prefer then Swedish girls or someone who's from England or France or something. So migrants then have to lie about where they come from. They have to take a client, they have less clients to choose from. They have to sometimes take lower prices. Like it's this whole like anti-trafficking narrative have given much less power to migrant sex workers. And I would say has given more power to people like me from Sweden.
So given all of this, these complex ways in which the policies in place might affect you negatively, what measures would you like to see in place that are, you know, currently lacking?
I mean, I think what you're doing right now, like just inviting sex workers to be part of the conversation, is pretty lacking, and it's pretty important. I mean, just using the word sex worker has excluded us from so many situations. Like we have never been invited to any meeting which is about prostitution or human trafficking. Like we've never been invited to a conference or to be part of a group. Like right now there's a suggestion that the law in Sweden be changed so that all clients who get caught paying for sex automatically get jail time. And of course, this law suggestions have been sent out to all these reference groups and blah, 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 but no one has asked us. And we find it pretty strange. Like, I mean, we all, like, none of us want sex workers to be harmed. And of course, we are those sex workers. Like, this question is so important to us. And like, people are really missing a chance when they don't include sex workers in these conversations. And I don't know, like refusing to listen to some groups because their views don't fit in with like the state system, that's very similar to a dictatorship. Yeah.
I would say there's no rehabilitation offered anywhere or any type of help in that matter as well.
I think there's like some kind of programs for rehabilitation, but I think that they tend to forget, which I think we are one of the, maybe the only organization that recognizes that sex work is work, and this is the way to make money. This is how we make a living. So when you have a rehabilitation program that only focuses on talking about your feelings or trauma therapy or getting sent back to your own country, that's not really solving the issue, which is that we all need money to survive.
Yeah, but Sweden denies it being a work. That's all. That's all.
It's like, I mean, you're looking for other kinds of work. That's not easy. Like, there's no financial support, or I know that, for example, Talita, they push people into taking cleaning jobs with like a Christian cleaning company.
But that's Talita. We should say Talita is an organization working in Sweden that provides some assistance to individuals who've been identified as victims of trafficking. It's a religious organization.
And I think that's pretty shameful that Sweden, which is a super rich country comparatively, has a lot of money and is very proud of this law and puts a lot of money into policing, that they are not funding their own shelters for sex workers or their own programs, and gives this instead to these Christian or super ideological radical feminist groups to do. Because we've had people who have come there and like found it incredibly traumatic. Like when the police come, they often have a social worker, and then the social worker like offers them help. But often the offer is not an offer, and the help is not really help. So one woman, for example, was thrown out late at night and was told, you can't stay in this hotel anymore, but you can go to this shelter, like where she's supposed to go. And
I have
she comes
experienced
there.
the same, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is that like, it's not really an offer, it's they're forcing people, and then you come there and it's
like you're getting thrown
religion.
at night from an apartment where you stay, do it in the lobbying as it is, and then you can't even go to a hotel that doesn't accept cash if you're a migrant worker, and then you end up in the middle of the night on the street.
Mm-hmm. Ophelia and Nicole, I wanted to ask you, will it be possible for you to stay a bit longer than to 5:30?
Are you able to, Nicole?
Yeah, I think so.
I received a message from the tech team saying that just a short break is needed. We have interpreters working, doing great work, going from English to Italian and so on. So I would ask for 5 minutes so that they don't faint in the summer heat.
Of course.
Is that okay
So,
if we
absolutely
take 5 minutes?
And we have
14
to remember to
past?
speak slower. Sorry about that.
So I'll see you again at 14 past.
All right, see you then.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
I was looking at the chat, and there's this question of whether there are any organizations who support sex workers in their fight for rights and recognition in Sweden. And this kind of touches upon a question that I want to ask myself, and that is, what are the main challenges to establishing a collaboration with Swedish anti-trafficking stakeholders that you've experienced, and like how do you see the role of Red Umbrella Sweden in this regard, given that you're an up and coming organization?
Well, I mean, we do have some support from the LGBTQ organization, RFSL, but it's pretty hard for any organization or even individual to be a friend to us because it can mean that you lose your job or you lose your funding. It's quite extreme in Sweden, I would say, in this regard. Amnesty International supports the decriminalization of sex workers, but the Swedish Amnesty has chosen to kind of stay neutral on that. And we've had some collaborations with HIV organization and organizations for people who use drugs here in Sweden who face similar stigma and oppression. But it's really hard to be on the side of sex workers because you're punished so severely and immediately. Would say like the main challenge maybe is like a misconception about us, who we are, and like what the sex worker rights movement is. We can't put all the blame on them because we're quite a new organization, and because we're not funded, like almost all of our efforts go into this like peer support. So we haven't had so much extra time or like resources to form networks and cooperations. But in the whole, I think the problem is that, like you see in Sweden, organized sex workers is an enemy instead of like an amazing resource that can reach so many sex workers. Like even just like that we call ourselves sex workers, that ends the discussion. Like, then they will not answer our emails. Like, it's a shame, because we are the people who sell sex, and members have experiences of human trafficking. Like, but we're not seen as that. There are like lies going around about us, like that we're not sex workers, that we're pimps or johns, or like we're controlled by a worldwide sex industry empire or something. Like, these lies are used to systematically silence us from like being invited to stuff, or from even being in the debate in Sweden. Like, we're not, that lie can be used to just silence us. And I think like we've just been overlooked as a partner in the fight against human trafficking. You know, like, we have the same end goal, that no one who sells sex should be harmed, but we just, like, the way there is a bit different. But I mean, like, just you, like I said, like, you including and inviting us here is like, that's super important. I think that, like, people have to recognize that sex workers, we are the experts on our own lives, and we're also experts in the sex industry. And, you know, like, researchers, authorities, policymakers, like politicians, they have to actively involve sex workers in this work, because we are like the main target group. Like, it shouldn't be a room somewhere far away with closed doors without us, where everyone speaks in a super academic language or like bureaucratic language that most of us, we can't understand it. Like, you have to involve sex workers. And it's not only that, it has to be a welcoming atmosphere. Like, you walk into a room and someone talks about you as a body that's being bought and sold, or compares my life to a slave, or, you know, like, that is not welcoming, or that our clients are demons who would rape our kids or something. Like, I've heard the most horrific things. Like, that is not a safe environment for me or any member of Red Umbrella Sweden to come to. That is super scary. And then, I mean, the last most important question maybe is financing. Like, a lot of these people who are involved in this, they are paid to do it. They can go to a conference, they can go to a meeting on their paid work time, but we are taking time from our work, which is sex work, to come and be there. So you have to pay us, sex workers, or like, our organization needs to be funded. And especially if you want a more diverse group of sex workers, then it's extra important to be welcoming and to pay people for their time.
I know that you have had some, you've seen some positive developments in meeting with anti-trafficking stakeholders in the Swedish context quite recently. Could you, we don't have to say any names or whatever, but could you tell us a little bit about that? Because I mean, we've addressed so many of the challenges that you face, but we're also seeing some instances of positive developments, and I think it's good to also address those to create some hope. Like, what's your recent experience been like?
Yeah, we had both a meeting with the police in Gothenburg City, and then one of these, there was someone here from Julia. You said that there are organizations that support sex workers, and we had a meeting with one of these organizations, and I think it went really well. It was apparent both in that meeting and the one with the police that there's some things that we it might have been the first time that they talked to someone who uses the word sex worker, and maybe might complain when they say selling your body or something like that. Like but I see it as like a first step. Like with the police, they had trouble understanding how it could be scary when the police come into your hotel room. Like, for us, that's so basic, and for them, they had no understanding. So we just see it as like, maybe that's the first meeting, and maybe after 10 or 15 meetings, they can understand what we're saying. And then after 10 or 15 years, maybe we can see some change. And with this, it's this social service for sex workers, I think that they listened to us. They could acknowledge that we know things that they don't know, that we have some areas of expertise that they can learn from us. And I found it very encouraging, actually. So that was super great. And I think it was great, first of all, that they agreed to meet with us. Like that was really cool.
Do you have any theories as to why these positive developments are happening now?
I mean, I'm hoping it's because we've been more visible and we've been around for a few years now. Someone asked how long we've been around, and I think as our old organization Fackförbundet, we started in 2017, and now we're Red Umbrella Sweden, and it's basically the same organization. So maybe they're just like noticing that we exist.
So this is your 4th year as active in this
so
format.
Bad accounting, but yeah.
I mean, you've achieved quite a lot in a short period of time, I would say. And sex workers organizations that have existed prior to the one you're part of have experienced the same struggles that you've named today.
I mean, we find it like super cool to be able to talk to sex workers who are organized in other countries. Like in Romania, there's a sex worker organization, and of course a lot of their members come to Sweden to work, so it's important to work with them. And in countries that just got similar laws to us in Sweden, they come to us and ask like, how do you deal with this, you know? So that kind of cooperation is important. You know, the fact that sex workers have for decades been fighting for these same things, there's so much to learn from them. I mean, I find it quite helpful, like to think about when I was a teenager, how people talked about gay people, and that there was like, should gay people be allowed to have kids? Like, no way, that is crazy. Like, it was completely fine to just, you know, if your child was gay, then your life is destroyed or whatever. And that has changed, you know, in my lifetime. That is different now. And I'm hoping, like, that's my hope, that it will be the same with sex work, that my mom shouldn't have to cry because her daughter is a prostitute, you know? So that gives me hope to think about.
Positive change. So when it comes to the group that the Insight project kind of focused on, which is migrants who may fall victim, who may become victims of trafficking in Sweden, what would you say are the next important steps to make their lives better?
I mean, I think like it's pretty scandalous that like the human rights of victims of trafficking are so tied to like a criminal case. Like they should have the right to all the support and to stay in Sweden if that's what they want, and to have other help. It shouldn't be like you get 3 months here if you're part of this court case and then you get thrown out. Like that's not a human rights perspective. And yeah, like no one should face deportation because they turn to the police for help.
Yeah.
What do you have some ideas, Nicole?
Yeah, I agree on that. As you know, I have experienced that myself, unfortunately. It's not very pleasant.
And I mean,
yeah, I don't think you should be sent back to somewhere because they think you might be a victim to something. And by sending them back, that doesn't resolve anything.
I mean, did you feel like there was somewhere you could turn when you were in the situation?
No. I felt trapped and really mentally not okay, I would say. I felt betrayed. I felt like no one could help me. They locked me in a facility for 3 nights and then just set me abroad.
So you did experience being sent away from Sweden?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that. But
First
then you made your way back?
Yes. Well, it's not far away where I'm from. So.
Okay. Was it the police that you encountered?
Yeah, it was me being kicked out from an apartment, then that information given to the police authorities, then given to social services in order to keep me in a facility for a weekend without any answers.
Do you see are you hopeful when it comes to positive changes?
I need
the Swedish system?
Yeah.
Would you say that?
That's why we're here, right?
Yeah, yes, of course. That's a good point. That's a good point. But that was prior to your bad experience. That was prior to the existence of Red Umbrella Sweden and Fackförbundet, which was the previous
yes, I was on my own. I didn't know Red Umbrella existed.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear about your bad experience. So Michela has a question. Did the police and social workers consider?
I've just posted it to start with, but we can leave it to the end, of course. We still have another half an hour that we can take.
Okay.
So let's just consider these in case other people have got questions that they want to post or ask. But thank you very much so far. It's been really, really useful and enlightening to listen to you both. Thanks.
Thank you for your time.
I think your question, Michela, is very timely. So I'm going to read it. So did the police and social workers consider your point of view, Nicole, and any potential risk you would face by being sent away from Sweden?
No, there was no. They interrogate me in a facility, which at the moment I cannot name, unfortunately, some social place. It was for about half an hour. Then decided because I was. Oh, I guess again it comes due to the law of the youth and care, which I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, they use that as a.
How old were you?
I think a lot of people don't know that in Sweden you can be locked up as a sex worker if you're between the age of 18 and 21.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was 19 at the time.
So that was something they used as a threat to you, or how was it? I don't remember.
Yeah, they said I was underage, so-called, under 21, and they used the law as what they had to lock me in the facility and then send me abroad.
So we have a law in Sweden which makes a distinction between, just to summarize it briefly, in Sweden you can engage in sexual activity without compensation with anyone from the age of 15. So from when you're 15, you're legally allowed to have sexual encounters with whomever, unless it involves compensation. Then you need to be 18. However, if you're under the age of 21, there's a legal act regarding the care of youth that makes it so that you can be taken into compulsory care for providing sexual services.
And I mean, I would like to add that these facilities are not super pleasant places. They're not like, oh, here's our best care for these people who might not have a family or are in trouble somehow. And
it was rather traumatizing to be there.
Yeah, and you were there for 3 days.
3 nights.
People can be. Sorry, go on.
No, it's fine. Continue.
No, but people can be locked up in this kind of care home for years. And there's a lot of reports about actual sexual abuse going on in these homes. We have one member who was selling sex in the facility to the person who's supposed to care for her. So find it very problematic.
Yeah, although we put a lot of emphasis on certain laws that we have in place. The Swedish policy that regards the sex trade is quite complex, as you've understood here, the audience. We've mentioned a handful of different laws that actually together regulate the trade in sexual services. Anything from immigration to penal law to laws concerning
would
young
say
people.
that sometimes it's not even the actual laws, because I had a meeting with Anders Sunesson, who was the Swedish ambassador for trafficking. He was representing Sweden and talking about this law, and he claimed, there's no law in Sweden that the kids of sex workers are taken into care, for example. Like, there's no law specifying that, but because of this law being around now for 22 years, that frames all sex work as violence against women, then what happens when a woman is engaging in that kind of work and there's a child in her care? Doesn't matter if that child is in school or at kindergarten or something, it's still like in the heads then of social workers, that's a really dangerous environment, and that's enough to take the child. So it's like, I don't know, it's a whole shift in people's way of thinking that kind of removes agency from sex workers and makes it so that if we speak, our voices don't count, because we are not even capable of taking care of ourselves. We're just victims, and so someone else needs to step in and protect us.
That is true. That is really true. Yeah, they put everyone under the victim aspect, which is, of course, it cannot always be that.
But the victim label doesn't necessarily entitle you to long-term support and protection, unfortunately.
Yeah,
And
that also.
I think that's the crazy thing when we organize for rights. People tell us, well, the law is not for you, so-called privileged workers who can speak. It's for the abused migrants and so on. But actually in Sweden, there is quite a lot of support available to Swedish citizens. Like, we can get the apartment through social services, we can get therapy, we're covered by the healthcare system, but there's very little for migrants, especially provided by the state. So to say that this law is beneficial to migrants, which is like 80% of the sex working population, is quite cynical, I think.
Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, that rhetoric doesn't translate into practice. Well, I think we've addressed most of my questions that I had, and I would invite the audience to ask you questions, unless you want to make some statement before. Ophelia and Nicole, if you have anything to add. I had a question about accessibility, but I think we addressed that quite thoroughly. But during one of our Insight webinars, a member from Red Umbrella Sweden made a comment about our the format being quite inaccessible, and so I just wanted to, I guess, ask how, according to you, we as researchers or organization stakeholders who are interested in improving anti-trafficking measures, how we can make them more accessible. But I think that you've touched upon that quite thoroughly. But if you have anything
it's
to
all
add.
about like involving sex workers in the process.
Do you have anything
if
to
you
add,
do,
Nicole?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Not really. Like Ophelia mentioned, yeah. It's
if you
important
do
to be acknowledged.
if you do research about us, it would be cool if we were also able to understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the language aspect is of course important. We tend to use maybe terms and abbreviations that are that anti-trafficking stakeholders are well aware of, but then individuals who sell sex might not be, right?
Like I think when I started doing activism, I wouldn't have understood what the word stakeholder means. Like, what does that mean? maybe, yeah. And I mean, about languages is if we know that 80% of sex workers in Sweden are not Swedish, then why is the website of Mika Mottagningen in Swedish? Like,
Right.
like you can translate it to English, but that's it. Like in Red Umbrella, we speak only English, like so that any member that speaks English then can be part of our board or organize events or get support. And when they don't speak English, we try to translate. And we have now 21 different languages within the organization. So, I mean, that's something we're really proud of, and that's a lot thanks to Nicole's work, who's been reaching out to migrant sex workers a lot.
Yeah, it is.
awesome.
It is hard to reach out to migrant workers because of the activity of the police and the social workers, and everyone is afraid to turn for help. Everyone thinks they're going to get in trouble or get deported or whatever. Really, so people are afraid to actually join the community.
Do you have
Actually-
any strategies that you adopt to
I
make
try
it
to be as
easier?
friendly as possible to show that we are not some scary organization and not there to cause them trouble, just to offer help and support.
Can I just read out maybe a question that regards the language, since we were talking about that, just to try and address as much as possible that the questions that have been posted. One is by Hope. She says on the aspect of language, is English a recognized language in Sweden, and how does speaking English affect migrants differently? You've been talking a little bit about this, but I don't know if you have any other point to make.
Nicole, do you think, like, as a sex worker, when you came to Sweden, like, it's helpful that you speak English, right?
Yeah, well, I think that English can be called so-called a second language in Sweden. It is common. People speak English here, so.
Yeah, it's quite.
I can imagine if you check into a hotel and speak good English, then maybe you're not discriminated against in the same
No,
way.
I often have been. By the way I look.
Or like if you have an Eastern European name, that could be a problem, or if you have darker skin, or
yeah, it could be a bit racism involved maybe, but that's a different subject.
For sure. I mean, Swedes are not bilingual in the sense that English is not our native tongue, but English is a part of the everyday life of most Swedes because of television and whatnot. And we study English from an early age, and also it's quite similar to Swedish is quite similar to English in terms of grammar and the language. So it's not so difficult for Swedes to speak English. Okay. We have a question from Rebecca. If sex work is framed as violence against women in Sweden, how do society and authorities deal with male sex work?
yeah, I think that's been a huge problem because we have a lot of male sex workers. Obviously, women are in majority, cis women and also trans women. But there's lots of guys who sell sex, and especially after the big migrant waves, there's a lot of undocumented male migrants who sell sex, and they've kind of then completely gone under the radar. Often they also don't identify as sex workers, so it's hard for us also to reach them. But yeah, huge problem. Would say that men who have sex with men have slightly better access to sexual health services, for example, in Sweden. But otherwise, like, it's kind of recently become the fact that all these organizations that say, you know, it's men's violence against women, they'll add at the end, and men and boys. Like, it'll be like against women and girls, and men and boys. that the violence always comes from men. So it's like you're kind of tacking that on at the end, but you're not really changing your frame of thinking.
We also have a question about Eurocentric and anti-feminist positions. Can you say something about how that influences the discourse in Sweden and leads to these policies? Like, how does anti-feminism and Eurocentrism play a role in Swedish policies? It's quite a big question. But I know we've talked about this issue, you and I, Ophelia, before, and I think you both touched upon this topic earlier today.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole law, it grew in a time when feminism was different and it kind of stuck in that position. The women who were fighting for the law were second wave feminists, and the law also came at a time when Europe was changing a lot and the EU was coming and borders were opening, and I think there was a lot of fear. It's not even Eurocentrism, it's like Swedish nationalism, where Sweden tends to think that we are the best and we have the best solution for everything. Like, we've had a quite strong welfare system that we're really proud of, and this law has kind of become part of that. And then to say, oh, now the borders are opening and all these crazy things from other countries like prostitution will come in, there will be giant brothels, or and we have to stop that because we don't want that in Sweden. We are a feminist country, but it's often the feminism of white middle-class women. Like back when we had Fackförbundet, I had a meeting with Jämställdhetsmyndigheten,
Swedish Gender Equality Agency, which is our national anti-trafficking coordinator, just to.
So they do stuff around equality, but they're also the ones responsible for prostitution. I told them basically what me and Nicole have been telling you right now, like that we have huge problems. And the woman said, but I hear what you're saying, but we can't have it here in Sweden. We can't be like in Southern Europe, because then it's a problem for me if I'm walking down the street, Els-Marie, I'm walking down the street and someone might think that I'm a prostitute, like men might approach me. And it's like, okay, Els-Marie, so like I'm risking my life here because you don't want someone to call you a whore. Like, that is not a reasonable way to like create policy. Like,
there is a lot of fear informing our policy making. Jenny Kronman is raising a hand. I don't know if I'm able to let people speak, but maybe someone else can sort that out.
Question, or is it
absolutely
better?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Everyone, thank you so much for sharing your valuable knowledge here, especially to Rus, but also to Isabelle, of course. I myself am a researcher, also like researching now sex work in Sweden and policies and laws, etc. But I just have a thought, and I want to throw it out here just to see if you have any thoughts on it, because I've also been reading a lot about like the Swedish has a very special history of like scientific racism during the 1920s, which targeted especially racialized people like the Roma populations, which is the same law as this like not an honest way of supporting oneself from the law of what's it called in English? Like lösdriverilagen, which is
the vagrancy law.
Vagrancy law. Yeah.
And but also sex workers were actually described like racially different from other people, and together maybe with like the mix of this like Christian values as well. This could be. I'm thinking a lot about why Sweden has this very specific like way of looking at sex work. But do you have any thoughts on that, Ophelia, Nicole, or Isabelle?
I'll invite you to answer that, Nicole or Ophelia.
I think it's just like so many things that came together that had to be right for this to happen. Like, I don't know, it could be so many theories. Like, I don't know, there was a while where Sweden was like super sexually liberal. And then I think people like kind of freaked out about that, and there was a backlash, and then this happened. Like, I don't know, it also has a very strong kind of social engineering aspect of the state, you know, being the parents and making sure that everyone is in folkhemmet, and everyone who's like a little bit outside of this. I mean, you know, everyone of you who have moved to Sweden from another country, it's like extremely hard if you don't have a social security number, personnummer from Sweden. It's hard if you don't have a bank ID, so you can log into various services. It's like, when you're in the system, it's very cozy and secure. You step a little bit outside, you're out. Like, it's the same now with for all of us that make money in cash. It's almost impossible to use the cash because the state is so much controlling, you know.
I could like to add that in a lot of places in Sweden, you can buy food, for instance, with cash as well.
Yeah, we're becoming a cashless society. That's quite apparent.
So I mean, like, people think of like, oh, Rus, how are you supporting people with violence from clients, for example? Like, we do that, but there's a lot of stuff like in the daily life of sex workers, like, where can I buy shampoo with my cash? Like, which bank will accept me as a client? Like, it's super tricky because we're not like a welcome part of society. Like, the whole law is about stopping us from doing sex work. Like, we're not wanted. And I think, you know, if that's the goal, then I think you should say that that's the goal, and you shouldn't say that this is for the protection of women or to help trafficking victims, because it's all about making sex work as hard as possible so it disappears. And I think also, like, it's pretty weird because Sweden's always been like not really believing in these like strong punishments and long jail time and this kind of thing. And especially on the left, of course, we've been progressive in that way, that we realize that probably if you go to jail, you will not become a better person, but maybe you become more of a criminal. But in this particular case, when it comes to feminism and sex work, it's like as much punishment as possible. Like, catch these guys no matter what, like put them in jail. And someone who's like a completely reasonable, kind person should then go to jail. Like, it's pretty crazy. And if you think about it, like, what does it do to a family when your dad then goes to jail? Like, it's not a very good perspective. And like, when you're just focusing on punishment, of course, like, you can't help sex workers at the same time because all your focus is on this. I don't know if we're running out of time, but I have a pretty good example. Like, we had a member who came in and she said, I had the most horrible experience. A man who was posing as a client came to me. He tried to strangle me and he tried to rob me. And then just like on the same day, another member in Stockholm area also, the same thing happened to her. And we realized this is the same person. He was from the same European country. And one of them was brave enough to go to the police because she's like, we have to stop this person from attacking other people. And the police, they said, we can't help you. Like, we will not even start investigating this. And the reason is you don't have any contact information for this person because you spoke to him on an anonymous app. So they just like, that was it. And that was pretty clear to all of us then that the police don't care when we actually are in danger. Then they do nothing. But they spend all this time chasing us and our clients that have done nothing against us, clients that we are happy with. And that's a weird priority and it endangers us all the time. And the whole reason why we're talking to clients on these anonymous apps is because no one will give us their contact information because the police is using it. So it's like, it's crazy making, and it's super dangerous.
That shows how important you are as an organization, trying to fill the holes in the system that unfortunately are there. Unless there are more questions from the audience, I would start wrapping up, because we've extended the webinar more than 20 minutes. I could go on talking about this issue for a very long time, but I know that many probably have other things to do. So unless Nicole, Ophelia, Michela, or anyone else from the organizational side have anything to add, then I want
to say thank you. Can I say thank you?
Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to thank you so much to the Insight Project for inviting us. Like, we went to your first seminar and we had some feedback, and you invited us to be part of this. I think that's really cool. I want to thank the interpreters, because I know this is a huge job, and I want to thank Nicole. This was your first time ever speaking like this, and that's a pretty big step.
I also want to thank for being here. Yes.
If awesome. I can see that Julia has a question, if she or a comment, if she wants to, if she can make it really quick. Before that, I just want to take 1 minute to say thank you really very much again to Ophelia and Nicole for, well, first of all, for the work that you're doing, for sharing your experience, also your personal experience with us, which I really think it's very brave on your side. And also, I really feel like saying that I'm shocked even more than I was before about what I've been hearing, and I feel deeply ashamed of being a woman, a European woman, in a context where things like that happen. So I do hope that you see some of your work recognized, and as far as we're concerned, for sure, we're very happy to include you. And thank you so much for raising your voice in our conference, which, by the way, brought to this seminar as a result. So thanks a lot again. I don't know if Julia wanted to say something, maybe?
Yes, something very quick. I just wanted to say thank you to Ophelia and to Nicole and to all the people that they organized this webinar. I work for an organization that is based in Malmo. I don't know if you know it. It's called NOMI. So it would be grateful if we can keep in contact, because we have experienced many situations like the one that you have described before. So the relationship between sex workers, people in prostitution, the way you want to call them, in police is tense. It's getting worse day by day, especially in this COVID period. So we are also trying to really educate the police, especially, well, when we work with human trafficking task force, we can see that they are very well trained and they know how to handle the situation. But with local police, we see that they don't know a thing. They don't know much about it. So if you have any suggestion how to approach the situation, because yes, some women, they are not really aware of what is going on. They cannot understand the situation. Sometimes they don't even know that they can actually legally sell sex in Sweden. So that would be great. Unfortunately, we experience a situation a bit different from those that you guys are describing, because most of the women we meet are not happy of being in prostitution. So it's the other side of the spectrum. So yeah.
Can I just say that our members are also not all happy to be sex workers, and we're trying to make it better for everyone who sells sex.
Sure, yeah. Well, let's keep the communication on. Of course, we need to networking to make everything better. I guess.
Great, you're very welcome to email us.
Sure, I will.
I'll put your email address here in the chat for anyone who wants to get in touch with Red Umbrella Sweden. I encourage you to do so. You're all very it's easy to access you guys, and you're open to communication. So I would encourage anyone who has questions to reach out. know more about Sweden or to network.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm happy to facilitate any contact too. Of course, I'll provide my email as well in the chat. And yeah, again, thank you for sharing. Thank you for letting us know what we need to focus on in moving forward. And have a great day.
Thanks for everyone who came here and who
so
are
many.
listening to the voices of sex workers. Like, that's really cool that so many came.
Yeah,
That is
very much
nice.
appreciated. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.